In this episode, we are going to be reviewing Scenes from a Marriage. This is the feature film version of the miniseries, which was released in 1974. It was written and directed by Ingmar Bergman, and it starred Erland Josephsson, Liv Ullmann, and Bibi Andersson. Welcome to Robert Bellissimo at the Movies. This is a YouTube video podcast where I explore movies from all over the world and talk about how those stories were told on film with a guest. Here on my YouTube channel, I also do interviews with various industry professionals who work in film, television, and theater. My guest is Nathan Jones in this video, who is a movie YouTuber as well. He also does Blu-ray and DVD reviews over on his YouTube channel. This was actually a part of a video I did a year ago with Nathan, almost a year ago, where we did 3 Ingmar Bergman films in one live video. And one of the films we did was Scenes from a Marriage, but I'm going to be taking the portion out of that video and adding stills to give everyone more of a visual reference as to what we're discussing as we really do a deep dive review into Scenes from a Marriage. If you're interested in seeing the entire video where we also discuss Winter Light and Wild Strawberries, the link is in the description box below. So here is the review of Scenes from a Marriage. Going on to Scenes from a Marriage, of course, with Liv Ullmann and Erland Josephsson. It's in the title, right? But what's the heart of this to you? What do you think he was really exploring here?
To really kind of put it in like a very simplistic terms, just human relationships and like kind of that ebb and flow of love. Honestly, I think it's love.
Yeah.
To me, I think it's interesting that we're kind of sold this idea, not just from like Disney, but like from just growing up, that love and marriage and caring about other people has to be a certain way, which I think ideally we want things to go the way that we expect it to kind of try to be. But there's a lot of hurdles, and that's really, really difficult. And that's what this movie kind of showcases in various forms, and obviously through various scenes, clearly in the name, which is really interesting just from the fact that when you love somebody, you do really bizarre things, and those bizarre things can either hurt or even like hinder or even help that relationship. And so when I watched Scenes from a Marriage, I actually watched the television series a few years ago. That was my stopping point, and it was actually a really hard stopping point because it's a very difficult movie or TV series to watch because it's very intense. And once again, this one's dialogue heavy, like we kind of alluded to, and you have to pay attention to really kind of understand how everything's going. And with that, like I said, it was a stopping point. So it was a really difficult part for me to stop because it's very intense, and it's a very intense film, TV series. I keep saying both because there is both. Yeah. And so when we were talking about, doing this, talking about 3 other movies, and we picked this together, I was like, okay, good, because now I can watch the movie and I can like revisit it and like kind of refresh my memory on it all. And obviously there's a lot of parts that were cut out for the differences there, and
it's talk about half of what the series is in terms of length.
Right. And it just really kind of it scraps out a lot of the like really getting to know either one of the characters on their own. And it really kind of sticks. The movie kind of just focuses more on like them, those two, and really focuses on those scenes that are involving them and not their stuff when they're separated, when they're doing their own life and like kind of trying to figure out themselves. And but the theme of this, I think, to me, is love and the overall arc of things. But that idea of relationships aren't always as ideal as we think they should be. And we never truly know or understand another person. And that's the harsh thing that I think really kind of speaks at the human condition is like, because we only really know ourselves, but at the same time, we really don't even know ourselves because we don't know what we want. And
That's right.
you have to kind of discover that with another person sometimes to kind of sharpen that self-image, but also like how you interact with other people. And I know I'm going on a rant, but
No, not at all.
That's kind of what I viewed this movie as. But yeah, that's all I got to say for right now.
Yeah, it's so, you're right. I mean, these questions of love and marriage and whether one can sustain love for the rest of your life with one person. And I think he was really, I mean, here's a guy, Bergman had so many divorces and he had many children. I was actually fortunate 2.5 years ago here in Toronto. Liv Ullmann was interviewed, and I was fortunate to have gone. And she said he was a horrible father, and I've read that as well. Like he was, he's not unlike some of the fathers you see
in his movies.
In his movies,
right?
And which was a contradiction, because apparently, as you looked at with Fanny and Alexander, he understood children so well, but yet he just wasn't there for any of them, really. But in this film, these questions, I love the build. I think it has a beautiful build. I mean, I think they don't think they have any problems. They don't necessarily know themselves, emotionally speaking. And, off the top, they're being interviewed and profiled about like a good, marriages that are good. And you get a sense that they're hamming it a little bit. There's not the actors, like the people.
Right.
They don't really quite know what to say. And I think that starts to peel an onion. And then, of course, you see him with that woman he works with, and he's asking her about his poetry. And she says, "Why don't you show your wife?" And he doesn't know why he doesn't show his wife the poetry. And then, of course, with Bibi Andersson and her husband, they're friends. And that scene is also brutal, and their marriage is awful and obviously on the brink of divorce. I mean, that scene is it's so brutal. The way in which everyone's so drunk that, of course, everything comes out over the littlest things that someone said, then, unleash this fury of resentments, and they said awful things to each other. And I think that really makes them, right after they leave, they say, well, can two people be together? I mean, they're open with each other about maybe things that they're thinking that some maybe people don't want to tell their spouses, but they're open with that. And I think they've been sleepwalking through the relationship, and then from there it's like, well, the sex isn't the same, it's getting stale, and then boom, suddenly he's gonna leave. He's having this affair with this younger woman. And that scene, I mean, to me, that was the best scene in the film, when he comes and says he's gonna go, the dinner, and when he says he's going to Paris with her, and she doesn't realize that it's going to be for like almost a year. In that moment, when you have to wonder if, because I know that he was working more in a documentary fashion, a camera reacting to the actors. You got to wonder when the camera operator was zoomed right into her face when he says, "I'm going to be gone for 8 months," and you see like the way she responds in like panic and pain. It's some of the best acting you'll ever see. I mean, it was so. Every time I see it, I'm like, it's like someone threw a ball in your chest. I mean, the performances are great. It's so amazing. And I think even when he suddenly snaps, I don't think he was angry at her. I mean, he's angry at himself, his shame. Yeah. And she responds in such a peculiar way.
I know.
Like, well, I'll help you pack and stuff. Right. I thought maybe she was saying that because maybe part of her was excited for the freedom now. I thought on some level, because she's like, "I'll help you pack," and then like he starts to say he's ashamed, and she cuddles him, and then she begs him not to leave. I mean, so much happens in that scene on an emotional level, but it's just such a it's so, like it's another film that it's all on the dialogue. It's all what they're saying to each other. Bare bones, production. I know it was really low budget as well, but yeah, I mean, it just everything just comes right, and it has everything. It has love, cheating, jealousies,
Comedy.
uh, the whole journey of a marriage. I also thought, why do you think they carried on with, like, even after they were divorced, then they were like, still sleeping with each other occasionally, and then going off with each other when they remarried. I mean, what do you think he was saying there about them?
I mean, I think it goes back to when we were talking about with Winter Light. It's kind of hard to quit things that we know, and
Right.
it's also just hard for us to get over something that maybe this is something that all of us do. I think all of us kind of tread over like what ifs, and a lot of us kind of think about like, well, what if I attempted this, or maybe if we're just not around each other all the time, like we can work this kind of thing that we still kind of care each other for, put back some excitement, like they're sleeping together,
Yeah.
outside of their marriage, like that brings them. I honestly feel like they're closer in that regard because they're not together all the time, and because of that, like they can have that
Yeah.
degree of separation.
It
And
becomes taboo, right? And they're like getting aroused by it.
exactly, and
Yeah.
but it's interesting because we're definitely in like the society that we live in, definitely kind of geared towards this monogamous kind of thing,
Yeah.
which for better or for worse, it can really make things really complicated and very interesting in the fact that certain things, depending on the relationship, can get really dull and really
Right.
boring.
Yeah.
And it kind of just shows that, like, hey, just like it's almost like you were saying earlier, it's a little semi autobiographical with Bergman, because like obviously his marriages and divorces
Right.
didn't end super well, but he worked with Liv, and he worked with a lot of his
Yeah, because they were separated at this point, right? And
yeah.
and they had already done Cries and Whispers together, and Face to Face, and so I mean, I can understand it's hard to stop working with when he's writing these amazing parts.
Right. And
It
it
would be
doesn't
hard to stop working with him.
exactly.
Um,
And I think it's weird because I mean, clearly they still have a relationship in some regard,
yeah,
but they're not together, you know? So
exactly.
that separation that happens where it's like, hey, I still like being around this person. It's just, I think it speaks of the strength of, everyone involved, really. Liv Ullmann in particular, not just in her acting, but just the strength of her character, and probably in real life, just showing that, like, hey, I can be above this thing that may have happened between me and Ingmar. I mean, obviously, I have no idea about their
Right,
relationship,
right,
and I can't speak on that. But to me,
right.
I think it is power to kind of separate that and be a part of something, and like be and really kind of represent something that is a little bit biographical, probably in some extent.
Oh yeah,
Um, and really kind of nail it and like hit it out of the park. And I think that's really telling about how wonderful and powerful these films are. So
yeah.
something like that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And, I always find it interesting if you look at the dynamics between the men and the women in his films, the women are always more emotionally mature and grow much more and are less cynical. For example, you see, like in this film, she grows. She goes on to, here's someone who was a dutiful daughter. You see that phone call early on with the mother, like, ooh, how am I going to tell my mother we're not going over for dinner Sunday? She was like terrified.
Mhm.
And she takes care of the kids and so on. And she was a common housewife, but she had a job as well. And then she goes on to start again and have a fresh life and gain perspective on the marriage that failed. And you see that scene where it gets violent between them when they finally sign the divorce papers. He's the one who becomes jaded and cynical and broke, and now he's not even happy with the woman that he left Liv Ullmann for, and he wants to go back to her, and she's like, no, and she goes, you know what, I was too I was always too empathetic and compassionate towards you, and of course that led to his violence and his rage that, just like you saw in Winter Light, they unleash, unfortunately, on the person closest with them, and it's often the men
Yeah.
who are like that. And I think he really understood that perhaps men have a much harder time grappling with these kind of feelings and this kind of growth, and women are better at it.
Something I've noticed with a lot of Bergman films, I haven't seen. I have only seen probably about 12 of them. But something I've noticed with his female characters are they're just absolutely spectacular, and they really do.
Yeah.
They kind of just even though a lot of his films are centered around men, right?
Yeah.
And like their kind of journey, and obviously that's what a lot of the films that we picked for today are like. They're centered around like men who are like having some kind of crisis of some sort,
right,
and kind of lashing out and taking it out on the people around them.
Yeah,
in some regard, and I think that's really interesting. That really kind of illuminates those characters. I think that's really fascinating. That I like Liv the most in this journey of everything, because Johan. It's like it's really weird, because to me, watching it and thinking like, you are making all the mistakes, man. Like, what are you doing?
Yeah.
Like, why are you going through with this? But at the same time, he
causes all the problems.
Right. And I mean, even in Saraband, which I actually watched after.
I haven't seen that yet. The sequel, right?
It's interesting. It kind of talks about the consequences of their lack of care for their children. And you kind of alluded earlier with Ingmar not having a great relationship with his kids. And I honestly think that has a lot to do with, like, because it was his last film, has a lot to do with him regretting that fact that he wasn't as close with them as he was. And so he revisited these characters in their later years, kind of seeing that. And honestly, you'll probably watch it and see like how that kind of ends up. So,
yeah, I have to see that. Yeah, I couldn't help but think of the connection with his own life in so many of these movies as we're talking about them. And by the end of Scenes from a Marriage, I was finding I was getting tired of these two characters. And he even said that. Because you see them at that point. I'm like, what do you? They're remarried to someone else. And they're still going off to some cottage having these affairs. And I'm like, what are you doing? I'm so sick of them at that point. But then you understand that they are, they're kindred spirits. They're bonded forever. I mean, I think they are actually truly in love. I think all these things happen because their love was tested, or perhaps the male, the husband, played, Erland Josephsson brilliantly. I just think he just made one too many mistakes. I think he's sort of, but he becomes clear that they both it becomes clear to them by the end that they just were flawed, that they didn't know themselves, that they made mistakes, more so him, but that they do love each other. I think that they could have sustained their relationship if they had been more emotionally mature about who they are. I think that, these things just happen, right? It's it happens. You get a crisis, you do something stupid, and then you think, why did I do that? I mean, it's so brilliant. But yeah, I've seen the miniseries twice, and I think I've seen. It's funny. I saw the feature last week, but I think I had only seen the series before. But as you said, yeah, the series there's more breathing room, and you see more of them separate. The feature, there's no breathing room. It is so like you have to. I watched it in 2 sittings because it's so intense.
Yeah, I watched it in 2 sittings too.
yeah, and it's over a 20-year gap. But yeah, it's so extraordinary. I'm sure you know that in Europe, Denmark and Sweden, the divorce rate went like
Yeah,
way
it
up
went up.
after this.
Yeah. Which Ingmar he was happy about. He was like,
Yeah, he was
good.
happy about.
It's like good, it's like get people to like wake up. And honestly, I
Yeah.
can't disagree with that. You know, if people are kind of just sold on this concept and not truly happy, then like maybe something like this will like really kind of speak to like our character and like maybe the stuff that we're actually going through. And I think that's good. At the same
Yeah.
time, it's hard. It's really difficult to go through things like that. I mean,
Yeah.
obviously, I don't understand it because I've never been married, so I really can't understand that fully. But at the same time, I think it's good to make sure that people understand where they're at and like where they're going and the things that they lack, and hopefully can get some perspective and some clarity, I suppose.
Yeah, and I think that's really what happened. I think again that brought. I could only imagine that it made people think about their own lives and their own relationships and how they feel about their relationships, and then obviously a lot of people were not happy and did something about it, and that's what happens in the series. But yeah, I mean, it's so extraordinary. Again, full of layers, full of discovery, and less so in the sense of, as we talked about with Winter Light, you learn so much from the visuals. But this is all, I mean, this was adapted into a play, and it totally works as a play.
Makes
as
sense.
well. And of course, Bergman was also, I mean, some people think his theater work was more important than his film work. There's some like Bergman scholars who have felt that way. I don't really know his plays, so I can't speak to that. But it's all on the text. It's all on the way they're interacting, and those incredible close-ups that go right to the soul of how they feel and who they are right then and there. But yeah, an incredible film. Was there anything else on Scenes from a Marriage you wanted to mention?
Oh, I just wanted to mention some of the contemporary films that like this film kind of influenced. I mean, maybe the most obvious one from a few years back is Noah Baumbach's Marriage Story.
Right.
Which, I mean, is there's a lot of scenes from that particular film that are mirrored here, and I actually think it's brilliant in that regard. It also kind of goes between his marriage that he had, and I think that, which is interesting. But then there's also behind me the Before trilogy, the Before Sunrise.
Oh yes, yeah, that's a good point. That's a good point. Yeah,
Before Midnight is almost
Before Midnight.
Yeah, it has a lot of parallels to Scenes from a Marriage, and has some scenes that feel very reminiscent of that. So I love those films that are connected in that sense. So it's even though all of those movies I just mentioned, Marriage Story, Before Midnight, and even Scenes from a Marriage, these are all movies that are incredibly difficult to watch. Yeah. Because of the subject material and the amount of focus that is and pain that can exist from those worlds. But to me, I think they're also really incredibly important to really kind of speak about the things that don't want to be spoken, and kind of like I said, kind of get some clarity where you're at and how you're feeling, what you're doing, and people you're interacting with. And I think that's really important.
And even the humor of it. I mean, I actually did find it funny in the sense that, they said their sex was stale when they were married, but then when they're separate, they're thinking about each other sexually all the time. And you saw that, like Woody Allen had. I mean, I know that mentioning Woody Allen nowadays is not the best idea, but of course, as we all know, Woody Allen was a huge fan of Bergman, and he had that in some of his films, where couples it would get stale, and then when they would separate, then they were more attracted to each other because they were divorced, in those. So he had those same themes in his films, of course, of death and love, existentialism, and you can see how he would pick up on the humor. Because the humor in Bergman's films is very subtle. It's very, very subtle. Even though he did have some comedies, right?
Yeah.
Not too many, but
Smiles of the Summer Night. Yeah.
Yes, that's right. Even I think The Magician is somewhat comedic. I haven't seen The Magician.
A lot of parts in
Uh,
Seventh Seal, like, you know,
oh yeah,
the
yeah.
traveling, the
That's right.
traveling band. Yeah, they're all pretty comedical.
All right. Well, Nathan, thanks so much for joining me. Where can people find you on your YouTube channel? Is it
Yep.
is it youtube.com/Nathan Jones?
Well, actually, because I don't know, I don't know like the whole thing. But yeah, if you like
Yeah.
look it up on YouTube, finding me through Nathan, just saying Nathan Jones.
Yeah.
Make sure you type in like movie review or movie reviewer or Blu-ray in those sense, because my name is fairly, common. But also, I always like make this joke that I'm not the Australian wrestler Nathan Jones.
That's what I was thinking. Yeah, the wrestler comes up.
The wrestler slash movie actor, because he's in Troy, he's in Mad Max Fury Road, the new Mortal Kombat.
Oh, I didn't know that.
He's recognizable if you see him. Like, oh yeah, I know that guy. That's not me. But if you want to find me on YouTube, that's I talk about Blu-rays and film as well, and collecting, and those are the things I like to focus on. You can follow me on Twitter. I'm not as active as I am there on YouTube, but I'm on Twitter. Nathan B. Jones 23, I think, is where, and I'll send you a link. But those are the two places you can find me.
Thank you so much, everyone, for watching. I hope that you've enjoyed this review. I want to thank all of my members on Patreon. If you're interested in becoming a member of my Patreon, head over to the link, patreon.com/Robert Bellissimo at the movies. Patreon is bonus content that I create month in and month out. And it is based on polls that I put out at the beginning of every single month, which you can vote on, which means that you will be very much a part of the decision making as to what I do on Patreon month in and month out. Patreon is a great way for content creators such as myself to earn an additional income, which will give me more flexibility to actually do more videos on my YouTube channel, as well as the audio version of my podcast, which of course can be found absolutely free on both the audio podcast and my YouTube channel. So if you like my work, please consider supporting me over on Patreon. The link again is patreon.com/Robert Bellissimo at the movies. And lastly, if this is your first time here, please consider subscribing to my channel by pressing the Robert Bellissimo at the Movies logo. You will see it floating above my head in the top left corner to your top left in just a second. Just click on that and then click the bell in order to get a notification every time I release one of my new videos or when I go live. Thank you so much, everyone. I will see you in the next episode.